It's the adventures of Evan and Devon. Hey, Evan, check this out. It's a cool optical illusion. In this picture here, is the top the sky or the bottom? Or are there just two skies? Is that mountain range just floating up in the sky somewhere? Ha, nice try, Devon. You can't get me. I know what's going on. The bottom of the picture is actually a lake reflecting the sky. Ha ha ha, you got me. But, Evan, can you tell me, why does a lake reflect the sky like that? I'd be happy to. So, the way it works, Devon, is when water is perfectly still, all the light rays that bounce off of it bounce off in the same direction. What happens is something called regular reflection. All right, whenever an object exhibits regular reflection, that means that you can see a reflection of something in it. And the image that you see will be very, very close to what the object actually looks like. Ah, that's really cool. Now, you said the water has to be still. So if the water was rushing, like in a stream or a river, or the surface of a lake during a storm, we wouldn't really be able to see a reflection. We might be able to see a somewhat distorted reflection, but chances are you probably wouldn't be able to see anything at all. The best conditions under which you can see a reflection in water is when the water's perfectly still. Ah, thanks for explaining that, Evan. Now, I noticed that there was actually another picture next to the picture that said regular reflection, and it had the words diffuse reflection. Can you explain what that is? Sure thing. Diffuse reflection is when the light rays don't bounce off in the same direction, like in regular reflection. They bounce off in a bunch of different directions. This happens on surfaces that aren't perfectly smooth and not very reflective. Well, typically, very rough surfaces, like the one shown in this picture here. Ah, I see. Now, I also want to talk about something called the law of reflection. Take a look at this diagram here. Okay, so imagine that teal rectangle is a mirror lying on the floor, a plane mirror. Okay, and imagine that green line is a line that goes from the mirror to the ceiling, and it makes a 90-degree angle with the mirror. Okay, so it's kind of like, you can imagine that it's kind of like a wall going from the mirror to the ceiling. Now, this red line on the left here, let's imagine that is a light ray. Okay, and it's a light ray that's approaching the mirror, and it's going to bounce off of it. Now, something really interesting happens here. Okay, so if we take a look at the angle that's between this light ray and that green line, it ends up being related to the angle of the ray after it bounces off of the mirror. Sorry, let me try saying that one more time, friend. Let's say we draw the light ray after it bounces off of this mirror. Something really interesting happens regarding the angle that's made with the ray that bounces off the mirror and the green line. Can you guess what happens? Well, it turns out that the angle of reflection, the angle made between the reflected ray and the perpendicular line, is equal to the angle formed between the ray as it approaches the mirror and that vertical line. By the way, that vertical line is called the normal, by the way. It's another name for it. So another way we can recap the law of reflection is to say that the angle between the ray that's coming in towards the mirror and the normal is going to be equal to the angle that's formed between the bounced ray and the normal. Okay? And by the way, it's normal for that to happen. Good one, Evan. All right, why don't we talk a bit more about curved mirrors? Before we do that, though, just to recap, regular reflection happens when you have a plane mirror and still water. Okay, it has to be a flat, smooth surface. That's really cool. Thanks for explaining. Can we talk about curved mirrors now? Yeah, sure thing. So remember, we learned about mirrors that were curved inward like a bowl. Okay, those are called concave. Okay, we have a side view of a concave mirror right here. Okay, so that blue piece of a circle is the mirror. It's a side view of the mirror. And each of those yellow lines is a light ray. Now you see what happens when the light rays bounce off of the concave mirror is they get closer and closer together until they actually meet. The point where they meet is called the focal point of the mirror. All right, and there's 4 different things that can result from a concave mirror. Okay, so if you have the object far behind the focal point, you end up with an upside down reflection that's smaller than the object. Oh, you know what? I've actually experienced this myself. One time when I was looking in a tiny metal spoon, I saw my reflection really small and upside down. Yes, that makes sense that would happen. The reason why is because if you're looking at a tiny metal spoon, the focal point would be very close to the spoon. And if you were looking into it, you'd end up being really far behind the focal point. So you'd end up with a small image that's upside down. Ah, cool. So what happens when the object is behind the focal point, but closer to it? Let's find out. Okay, so we move the cute little rubber ducky closer to the focal point. We end up with an inverted image again, something that's a reflection that's upside down. But in this case, it's bigger than the object. Okay, so that means a concave mirror can have an upside down reflection that's smaller when the object's really far away from the focal point. And it can also give an upside down reflection that's larger when the object's closer to the focal point. Correct. But remember, in both of those cases, the object has to be behind the focal point. There's one more situation. The object can be at the focal point. I'm sorry, there's actually 2 more situations. The object can also be at the focal point or in front of it. Let's talk about what happens when there's an object in front of the focal point. All right, so when the object is in front of the focal point, you end up with an upright reflection that's actually larger than the object. All right, now this is why concave mirrors are often used for makeup and shaving, because it gives people a good view of their face. It ends up giving them an enlarged view of their face. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But why do the inverted images occur with a concave mirror? Oh, you know what? That's a good question. Let's talk about that for a second. So if we go back to those diagrams that we looked at earlier with the inverted images, okay, we can imagine that the orange ray is bouncing off the top of the rubber ducky, then off the mirror through the focal point, and the green ray is bouncing off the top of the rubber ducky through the focal point, and then it bounces off the mirror parallel to that dotted line in the center there, or parallel to how the orange ray started out as well. Now the place where those 2 rays come together tells us where the top of our image will be. Notice it ends up being over here, which is below this dotted line. Okay, so the rays from the top of the object end up getting inverted. Okay, they end up underneath the object on the opposite side. So that's why we get an upside down image. And that happens whether the object is far away from the focal point or closer to it. As long as the object is behind the focal point, you'll get an inverted image. Ah, okay, very cool. So what happens when there's an object right at the focal point? Well, if there's an object right at the focal point, it kind of makes it so the light rays can't really converge. So you don't actually get an image. You can't see anything. And if you actually have one of those concave makeup mirrors that I was talking about earlier, if you move it away from your face, in such a way that your face is at the focal point of the makeup mirror, you won't be able to see anything. It'll just be a distorted image. Well, not even a distorted image. It'll just be like you can't even see anything. It'll just be like skin color. That's about it. Whatever color your skin happens to be. Ah, I see. Interesting. So just to recap, there's four things that can happen with a concave mirror. You can end up with an image that's smaller and upside down. And this happens when the object is far away from the focal point behind it. You can end up with an image that is larger and upside down. That happens when the object is close to the focal point but behind it. And then you can also end up with an object, or an image, that is larger than the object and upright. That happens when the object is in front of the focal point. Okay, and then finally you end up with no image at all when the object is right at the focal point, which you can experience for yourself with a curved makeup mirror. If you can get your face right at the focal point, you'll just see a blob of, it'll be like a super enlarged, like, skin cell, basically. That's what it will look like. Anyway, let's move on here. I also wanted to talk about convex mirrors for a second, if that's okay with you, Devon. Oh yeah, of course. I'm always up for more science, Evan. Please tell me, how does a convex mirror work again? Okay, so remember with the concave mirror, what happened was the rays converged at the focal point. Remember, convex mirror is the opposite of a concave mirror. What happens with the convex mirror is you have a surface that's curved outward. Okay, so it's kind of like the surface of a globe or a ball, right? Okay, and what happens with the light rays is they end up bouncing off of this surface in such a way that they get further and further apart from each other. Okay, just like in the diagram there, we can see that those yellow lines are like light rays. All right, now if we were to extend all of those light rays past the mirror, we'd see that they converge at a point behind the mirror. Okay, so that's, in this case, that's the focal point of our convex mirror. Okay, and what ends up happening, my friends, is the images we see in a convex mirror appear like they're coming from a focal point behind the mirror. That's why we end up seeing smaller images in a convex mirror. Okay, that's really cool. Thanks for explaining that, Evan. All right, friends. Well, that's it for this video. So what we're going to, I think the best thing for us to do is to reflect on what we learned. Evan, you're always full of jokes, aren't you? Yeah, I always am, among other stuff. Well, thanks for joining us, friends. Please tune in again soon for more cool science info. It's the adventures of Evan and Devon.